for joining us again. This is Austin Sterling with Pinion. Welcome back to our video series, A Seat at the Table, where we're talking to different opinions around the table when it comes to estate and succession planning in your farming operation. And I've got Jim and Ethan here today. We're having a conversation about the off-farm heirs. Our previous videos, we talked to the patriarch of the family and then the on-farm heirs, and just dive in a little different perspective today. So first off, I'll have Jim and Ethan introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do with our firm and how they help families in this situation. So Jim, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Austin. Again, I'm Jim Ryan. I lead our next gen function with Pinion, which primarily is working with our customers on estate planning and some of those succession elements that the series is addressing. I've been with Pinion for 28 years, and again, get to work with a lot of our customers in the ag space, particularly in row crop, around what they're trying to accomplish from an estate planning perspective and what the next generations will be holding and how they work together. So glad to be here today.
Thanks, Jim. Ethan?
Hello, everybody. My name is Ethan Smith. I am on our family business advising team. You've met Devon and Lance if you've watched the previous videos before. My primary function is helping and assisting in conjunction with Jim and some other pieces of the firm around that family conversation piece, whether it be some conflict management or really the psychological succession of generational transitions for a family farm and operation. I've been with the firm for a few years, but early in my career, I was in the trust and specialty asset world where I dealt with a lot of families and long-term trusts that held agricultural assets, farms, ranches. And so I've seen kind of a plethora of the formal side of transitions through wealth and management, but have been passionate about understanding and helping families transition through keeping the farm with the family in essence. And that's kind of my basis. So yes, spend most of my time front facing with clients, encouraging those difficult conversations to happen and come into some resolution on the other side.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for both being with us here today, guys. Jim, I'll start with you. And we run into this situation a lot with these farms that have, certain members coming back to the farm, but there's always seems to have off-farm heirs that are involved with the decision maker, or at least grew up on the farm and want to have a say in it. And my first question is, if you are that off-farm heir, you grew up on the farm, you were involved with the farm at an early age, you're no longer working on the farm through chance or circumstance or decisions you've made. What should you be entitled, or what could you be entitled to as that farm succession takes place?
Sure. Excellent place to start, Austin. First, I'd answer that whether you're on farm or off farm, you're not entitled to anything really. And I say that not to be harsh, but more from the standpoint of these are operations and assets that either your mom and dad, your aunt and uncle, your grandparents, someone else owns and controls today. I hear this a lot, that there's not a birthright necessarily in a lot of cases as it relates to the farm ground, the ranch, the equipment, so on and so forth. So the discussion really needs to begin around what impact or what interactions do off-farm heirs have with the current environment. That can be very, very little to none. It can be, oftentimes there's some. And just real understanding where those impacts are as it relates to the operation and kind of where you lie in terms of how does this business run, and separate that from asset ownership. So I'll use land as an example. You don't have to own land to be able to farm it or to ranch it, right? You can own it as an asset, and others can operate it and pay a lease payment or pay rent or other arrangements. So separating that, what I would call the day-to-day, and how are we making decisions for the business is a different conversation, a different context than, well, how should we own these things going forward, and what makes sense for the family from an ownership perspective.
Yep, great point. Great point. And that leads kind of my next question. I know, you get into the day to day and the farming operations, it's stress day to day, and these conversations are heavy and hard, and what the timing is never right. It feels like it. And Ethan, I guess, in your experience, what is a good setting or timing, to have these conversations with your family?
Yeah, one thing I'd echo on Jim's point there too is there's kind of the wealth side and the business side. He talked about land as equity and how those two can be separate. And rarely growing up on farming operations or really in any family business do we have a clear line of separation between those two things, because the engine that's running the car is the business or the operating farm, and the wealth creation is kind of the body of the car itself, and it takes both to run it. And it, again, it starts early in the process, or early in childhood, kind of understanding the separation between those two things. And a lot of sole proprietors, or a lot of kind of inventive entrepreneurs, or matriarchs and patriarchs, don't typically think that way as they're building a business. So the earlier you can have these conversations and understand that separation, the better. Now, as far as timing goes, the best timing is probably yesterday. Likely, if you're working through this, or even thinking about the idea of transitioning the business or the estate, you've already got some of these questions or preconceived notions built in within your family. So the best kind of timing is start now, and start with open communication. A lot of times, through generations, we're somewhat tight-lipped about the difficulties and the struggles and the successes of the business. Sharing some of that with children, whether they have interest in coming back to the operation, or whether their interests or skill sets lie elsewhere. And this can be as formal as a facilitated meeting with your tax or legal professional, or with somebody like Jim or I, even Austin, sitting in the room, all the way to the dinner table conversation. I caution that Thanksgiving is probably not the time to talk about business, but sitting around the dinner table, just kind of understanding what has been built here. The other thing is, a lot of times when children grow up in a business, they see the good and the bad, but don't remember the middle. And why does mom get a new car this year? Well, it's for tax planning purposes. We're right on that bubble of paying income tax. Or the bad, why was dad out till 3 a.m. harvesting, or checking cows at ungodly hours of the night, and taking a rest in the middle of the afternoon to kind of get the energy back for the next day. So there's a lot of that middle ground between the highs and the lows that we tend to forget, especially growing up on a farm operation, but also as we kind of transition through our life cycles as adults, and the focus on whether it's a 9 to 5 corporate job, or whether it's involved in the operation. Taking some time to kind of peel those layers back and say, okay, there is a middle ground, there is a purpose and a reason for this. Just start that conversation now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, we run into a lot. I know I have a lot of friends and colleagues too that grew up on the farm, worked on the farm, definitely maybe have an appreciation for the farm, but knew that their professional life would lead them elsewhere. And I've heard the phrase before, they love the farm, but they're not in love with the farm. They want to be a part of it, but they don't want to be there in the day to day. And I guess, Jim, what do how do you stay involved in an ownership, level, without causing friction for those that are on the farm day to day doing the daily tasks?
Just like all of these operations we're talking about, each one's different. Each family situation and the dynamics are different. So, pretty understandable. There's not a one size fits all, but often we would see a situation where, off farm heirs, if you will, are part of, for example, like what we use the term advisory, like an advisory board, if you will, in relation to the operation. So And again, that can take a lot of different forms in and of itself. But what we've seen is, like a biannual meeting a couple times a year where this advisory group gets together, which includes those that are on the farm operating every day, ownership group of assets, which sometimes aren't the same individuals. And again, those off-farm heirs, which might be wearing several hats or different hats. They might be in an ownership group, but don't have day-to-day, but they're part of this advisory group. That gives the operating folks, people there day-to-day, to be able to share information of how the crop looks this year, where prices are heading, what they kind of anticipate, maybe even for the next growing season, where they, from a financial perspective, where are things at from a lending perspective? Are we looking to refinance? Are we going to leverage more ground this upcoming year? All those different kinds of financial discussions get brought up and covered, and it's a really good opportunity for kind of this back and forth to understand where things lie. It also allows the non-farm heirs not only that insight, but to obviously have a sounding board for those that are there day to day and just saying, hey, we're thinking about this. That might have impacts for all of our ownership group, to get some input. Some of those functions are very formal, where you actually even have titles within that advisory board. Generally, there's not votes going on, but you can make that. The beauty of it is you make it how you want it to be. That's the flexibility within that. So again, that's where it comes to these different conversations that Ethan was talking about for the family, and getting further down the road of how is this going to look, and what kind of guardrails do we put in, and what kind of things can we do to help the communication, not only generationally, but for those that have different responsibilities.
Great. Yeah. I mean, put a different spin on that too, Ethan. I mean, in your experiences too, how have you seen some of those off-farm heirs? Like, is it running a grain cart during harvest? Is it, helping with the books, or is it having their kids? How have you seen some off-farm heirs earn that respect and kind of been seen as a valued member, even if they're not showing up every day?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to go back to your comment too about loving the farm, but not being in love with the farm. And a lot of that comes with whether the opportunity was given or not, for some of those off-farm heirs. Whether the business life cycle didn't allow for someone to come back early in their career and start off, or finances, or just the sheer income wasn't there to support multiple families. I mean, that's a key determinant in what drives a family member to become an off-farm heir. Also, interest can be different too. There's a level of an interested party versus an involved party. Sometimes it's purely sharing that information, like the loan packages, or markets, or economy, or production tactics, some of those things. A lot of times, in my prior experience and with families that I've dealt with, that off-farm heir doesn't necessarily understand their ability to ask questions, and maybe isn't willing to, or feels somewhat uneducated about the subject matter, that they're usually hesitant to ask those questions. And providing, I'm going to go to the 4 C's: communication, 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 and communication. It's all very important, and the opportunity to be a part of the conversation can be a huge thing for some of those non-active farm family members. They have the chance to work through and to ask some of those questions, and a setting to do so, whether it's at the kitchen table or a formal setting, to start becoming interested, which allows them to become more involved. Now, there's a tightrope to walk there on what influence they have when it comes to operations, or asset holding, whatnot. But there's many ways to be involved, and it probably starts with that interest level, and just an open communication, the willingness to ask the stupid questions, or just the understanding. Again, as a 18-year-old kid going off to college or a 22-year-old kid coming out of college, we're still somewhat naive to how businesses run. Even if farming is a livelihood and a lifeblood of the family, we're still somewhat naive to that. And so as you grow professionally, as you embark on your own path, you start to see how the world works in a way. The advisory board or the advisory position that Jim talked about is definitely one thing we've been working with clients on, not only to get that communication or that information out there, but hey, it's an opportunity to provide a little bit of institutional knowledge, if you want to call it that, whether it be agronomic specific or whether it be just kind of business, lifestyle, community, those types of things. So getting involved in that advisory position, having the responsibility a little bit of being involved and having your voice heard is important, because there's a lot of responsibilities that family members don't necessarily know they have, whether they're on farm or off farm, when it comes to the business, whether it's going through transition or in kind of stable operation. There's one thing that I like to hit on, or I kind of harp on a little bit, is the family's got the responsibility of deciding the vision and the path in which the business is going to take. Sometimes vision is not always grow. Sometimes it's not always just about efficiency. Some of those visions and that kind of family hat you wear can influence where the business goes and influence the involvement of those off-farm heirs too. And having somewhat of a clear vision, obviously in the trade it's recommended, and in most of the clients Jim and I work with, having an articulated and communicated vision is very important. And so that helps in understanding what role they can play in the business as a family member, as an owner, or even in the future, some sort of management involvement or day-to-day involvement with the operation.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, the vision's important, but communicating is probably even more important, and making sure that everyone from the top down and off farm heirs all are kind of rowing in the same direction and see that vision. That's great. Great advice, Ethan. Well, Jim, we've talked a lot about, coming back to the farm, loving the farm, figuring out how to work with the farm. Let's switch gears. And, we run into a lot of families that you already have inherited some and you're off the farm. But what if you want to exit that ownership team? What if you need the funds, or there's friction amongst your co-owners or whoever? How do you know what's fair as an off-farm heir of what you can buy out? And thinking of the greater good of the operation and the family, what's fair for you and the operation? How do you approach that conversation, and what options do you have if you're a current owner and you're looking at exit plans?
Ethan mentioned this in a different context, but when he had talked about, well, the time to do something was yesterday. This is one of those circumstances of, if you can have these different discussions and get some, again, guardrails and some parameters in place before the need arises. If we get into a situation where someone is declaring bankruptcy and they're an owner, if we don't have those parameters in place, it gets difficult for the family on all sides, because you're in that negotiating pattern, and circumstances led us to, I use the bankruptcy example, or if there's a death in the family and there's these interests that are now either passing to others that may not be involved in the family business within the operations, or maybe they are. How do these pass? Do they buy them? Do they just inherit them? All these different things occur because of an event. So have the plan ahead of the event. In relation to your question, have those parameters of, all right, if I want to exit the ownership of, whether it's on the operational side or even just on the asset side, if I'm an owner in some land entity or something, and I'm not there every day, but maybe for me, it may not even be adversarial, it may not be an event. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for me to be an owner. So I want to cash out. Well, what makes sense? So there's, of course, the balancing act of we'd like an environment where, in my circumstance, I can exit ownership, but also balance that with what's, I'm going to use the term fair, and that takes a lot of different connotations, but something that from the operational side and from the entity that I have ownership in, from that perspective, I'm not causing harm, right? I'm not, it's like, hey, they got to come up with all this cash just to buy my interest out because I want out. Well, we don't want to put the entity or the organization in a bad spot from a cash flow perspective, from a lending perspective, from an operational perspective. So there's this balance around, okay, well, what would make sense? And you almost have to take your family hat off of, hey, I'm part of this family, and think about it as kind of a willing buyer, willing seller type scenario. What, again, with no outside influence or outside factors like, oh, I had a divorce in the family or there was this death going. Take those triggering events out of the equation, but what would happen in a willing buyer, willing seller scenario? Usually, it's not just all cash coming up one day, right? Somebody's going to buy someone's operation. They're usually not just stroking a check and walking away that one day, right? So there's usually a period of time. Often we'll see something, as little as 5 years, and it can go as long, frankly, almost as long as you want it to be, but a situation where you're not causing the organization to just come up with a pile of cash and have to leverage a bunch of assets. Balance to that is there's some down payment, right? There is some cash involved, often a down payment, if you will. And this period of time, if I want out, I get paid over some period of time. And again, with interest rates genuinely fluctuating, you have some wiggle room, if you will, to say, hey, if I ever want this situation to happen, we'll look at the prime interest rate and add 0.5%. So you don't have to lock in, so to speak. And whatever you agree to at that time, and basically I'm talking about a buy-sell type agreement for this organization. Know that if all the parties agree to something different outside of that arrangement, that's okay. So let's say we get an arrangement that says, all right, if I want out, I get paid over 10 years and maybe I take somewhat of a discount, right? It's like, I don't get dollar for dollar on value because I'm forcing this exit. Maybe I get 80 cents on the dollar or something like that. I get paid over 10 years, some interest rate. All right, we agree to that. And time goes on, and we just have an amazing operational year. Prices were fantastic. We've never seen such a good time. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe now's the time. And I'd like to get out, and we start talking, and it's like, well, we have this agreement that says it's 80 cents on the dollar over 10 years, this interest rate. If the organization and other family members and we all agree to, you know what, we're swimming in cash right now, and you know what, we'll just pay, we'll just not just do the 10% maybe down payment. We'll pay half of it to you right now, and we'll pay you the rest next year. Okay, that's not the agreement, right? But we're all agreeing to something outside of that. That's okay too. And I bring all of that up in detail as a way to explain there's flexibility with it too. The point is to have something arranged ahead of when you need it so that you're avoiding some of that sometimes uncomfortable and adversarial type arrangement when you would have to negotiate without anything on paper to begin with.
And I'll echo a little bit of that buy-sell importance. We often say, figure out how to get out of business together before you get into business together. And in families, we are not good at that. We make the assumption that it's going to continue at this level, whether it be 3 siblings owning it or, even a cousin or aunt and uncle involved. We kind of make the assumption that it's just going to roll the same way it did. And so that buy-sell is very important. down to the level that that is the stopgap. That's the last straw. Jim is absolutely right. You can make any sort of arrangement outside of that as long as everybody agrees. The other thing I would add to exiting ownership, a lot of times off-farm heirs have a reason that they want to exit or that they're considering exit. And I'd encourage that there's a lot of avenues around that. One of the things I've seen recently with clients is, on-farm heir, the operation just bought him a new house, and gosh, it's a nice house, and I sure want a new house too. Well, the creation of capital, or the influx of cash, they may need or be in need of something for a house or medical expenses or going through a divorce settlement, something like that. Like, there may be a need for cash. Well, they may not necessarily want to exit ownership or partnership in whatever the entity is. They may just want the access to capital or the access to cash. And so there's a lot of aspects of, intercompany notes or long-term payouts or, decreased ownership percentage, options in there for off-farm heirs. And I'll reiterate again, I stick in kind of that family side where likely there's a reason that there is some disdain. And if we can understand that reason, families inherently can work through issues. A lot of times they take some poking or prodding to do so, but they can work through issues without sacrificing that long-term investment or even sacrificing the risk of conflict or relationships that they have. And so, I'd encourage, when looking at an exit or when considering an exit, let's weigh some of the options here, because maybe it's just a loan from the business or from the equity. There's a lot of opportunities for off-farm heirs in conjunction with the business and family.
No, that's good. And, in closing here, one last question. You guys can both weigh in on it. And I talked to a lot of farming operations too about this estate planning conversation. We do get a lot of off-farm heirs coming up to us, and you guys both talked about kind of figuring things out before you dive in, and making sure your buy-sell agreements and all that stuff too. If you're an off-farm heir and you can see the business growing and you can see success on the farm, but your parents or grandparents, whoever, have no succession plan, it's going to impact you and the operation. How as an off-farm heir do you approach that estate planning conversation with your parents or whoever's involved without coming off like a controlling off-farm heir and entitled to your money or whatever? How do you come across in a good way to, create some urgency and show them the importance of this, if there is no plan at all? Because I get approached with that a lot, of how do I tell mom and dad they have no succession plan without coming off like a greedy child, so.
Yeah, I'll if you don't mind, Ethan, I'll just jump in just from my perspective. The conversation can begin around whether you're on farm or off farm or any combination thereof. It's really about what do mom and dad, aunt and uncle, grandparents, whomever's in control today, what are they wanting to see in the future? Often, not always, but very often, it's at the beginning, we like this, whatever this is, right? The farm operation and the legacy, we like it to continue. That's often towards the top of the list. And the one thing that those folks can do to increase their chance of that happening, more than anything else they do, is to begin those conversations and work towards a plan. And presenting it in that context often goes over pretty well, because it's not about who gets what. It's not how the conversation is beginning. It's mom, dad, grandparents, aunt, uncle, whomever it is. If that's something that is a desire of yours, is a goal of yours, is what you've built to continue to some degree going forward, that legacy component, you can increase the chances of that actually coming to fruition more than anything else you do by getting a plan put together, whatever that plan is. That begins the 4 C's, as Ethan had mentioned earlier, right? That starts getting that communication going, whether it's with those folks and their advisors, the family. It's a combination of all these different things. But that's the one thing they can do to increase their success or their chances of success to meet those goals, is to get that process going. I would just add to that, and this is really heavy-handed. I would not recommend a on-farm or off-farm heir to use this terminology. That if you don't do that, not only the chances of your goal succeeding, I mean, hope's not a plan, but that's really what's happening in that context if you don't do the planning. You're really doing a disservice to everybody, whether they're on farm, off farm. You're leaving it to chance, and you're not arming the next generations with any kind of guidance. And it's a shame when that happens. So that's my little plug, if you will, of I probably wouldn't use the terminology of, hey, you're doing a disservice if you don't, but from the context of, if that's a goal of yours for this to continue on, begin that process, because it's going to increase your chance of success greatly.
That legacy item is extremely important, especially looking multi-generational, right? It's very rare that the entrepreneur, in the farming sense, that started in the late 1800s or has been through the Great Depression, it's very rare that they're thinking, okay, I'm supporting multiple families after this. Typically, we think that we're just supporting that next stage, and that's kind of the historical perspective. But when we get into times like now, where farm profitability has been historically decent, operations are growing, we're supporting more people, supporting more families, understanding that the legacy, whether it's our legacy is to drive John Deere tractors and plow the same piece of ground, or whether it's the opportunity to say, okay, I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for kids, grandkids, whomever else. But if the opportunity is not necessarily here on the farm, what have I equipped them with to go make their own legacies using our family name? Right. We often get in the perspective that the only legacy is the land. And I think most large employers would disagree, because there's always been an adage that hire a farm kid because they're going to work, right? So there's that aspect of the legacy is the work ethic, the morals, the values, and the opportunity to go build something else, whether it's on the farm or whether it's farm adjacent. A lot of these supplier companies, other vendors or support businesses have been born from the legacy of that prior generation or two prior generations that they instilled in that farm family.
Great note to end on, Ethan. That's a great finishing line there. Well, thank you, Jim and Ethan. And I would say too, if we're getting a theme from our seats at the table, no matter your seat at the table, ask questions, start the conversation. That's going to be beneficial to all parties involved. So I know we got a lot of changes to our state tax provisions here next year, it's looking like. So start these conversations, reach out to Pinion, reach out to your advisors, get the conversation started. And we'll see you next time on our next video of this Seats at the Table. So thank you, guys.